No one in the city planned for tomorrow. Not because they were careless, and not because they were brave. They had simply learned that tomorrow did not belong to them anymore. In the walled city of Blackmere, in the east of England, days were counted the way men once counted coins, quietly, cautiously, knowing the pile would soon be empty. Thomas Hale rose before dawn, as he always had. Habit survived longer than hope. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, listening. That was the first task of every morning now. Not prayer, not thought, listening. If the bells rang before sunrise, the day would be different. If they rang twice, it would be worse. This morning, there was only silence. Thomas exhaled and pulled on his boots. The leather was stiff, cracked by damp and neglect. He tied them slowly, giving the quiet time to betray him. It did not. He stood, took his cloak, and stepped outside. The street greeted him with stone and shadow. Blackmere had once been a city of noise. Carts rattling over cobbles, merchants shouting prices, children chasing each other through alleys too narrow for light. That city still existed, but only as a memory layered beneath the present one, like a ghost that refused to leave. Now the streets were wide in a way they had never been before. Wide because no one filled them. Doors were shut, windows dark, shutters nailed closed from the inside. Chalk marks stained the wood, some fresh, some smeared by rain, some left untouched long enough to fade. Thomas did not read the marks anymore. He knew what they meant. He walked toward the northern wall, his steps echoing louder than he liked. Sound carried too far these days. It slipped under doors. It announced life. Life was dangerous. As a watchman, Thomas was meant to look outward, to watch for riders, banners, smoke on the horizon, to warn the city of threats that came from beyond the walls. But the threat had come quietly, without horses or steel. It had slipped through cracks no one had known were there. The wall loomed above him, gray and patient. He climbed the narrow steps and reached the parapet just as the sky began to pale. Dawn crept in like a reluctant guest, touching the rooftops without warmth. Beyond the wall, the countryside lay still. No farmers in the fields. No wagons on the road. The world had drawn back, leaving the city to rot in isolation. Thomas rested his hands on the stone and watched nothing happen. That, too, had become familiar. Behind him, Blackmere stirred, but not with life. With waiting. A door opened somewhere below. Just a crack. A woman's face appeared, thin and gray, eyes darting as if expecting to be struck for daring to look outside. She placed a bucket on the step and retreated, pulling the door shut again with care, as though sound itself might enter. Thomas turned away. He did not like watching people pretend they were still living. The bells rang an hour later. Once, the sound rolled through the city, slow and heavy, settling into the bones of every building. Thomas closed his eyes as it passed through him. One bell meant one death. It always started with one. He climbed down from the wall and walked toward the center of the city. People emerged cautiously now, as if drawn by the sound despite themselves. Faces appeared in windows. Doors opened just wide enough for bodies to slip through. No one asked who had died. That question had stopped mattering. The market square stood half empty. A few stalls remained, their owners pale and distant, hands shaking as they handled bread and cloth. Goods lay untouched. Coins were exchanged without contact, dropped into bowls, left on stones. Thomas passed a baker he had known for years. They did not speak. They did not nod. Acknowledgement felt too close to goodbye. The air smelled wrong, not yet of rot, but of something turning. Smoke mixed with damp wool and unwashed skin. The smell clung, followed, lingered. A man coughed near the well. The sound sliced through the square like a blade. Everyone froze. The man covered his mouth, eyes wide with terror. He backed away from the well, spilling water onto the stones. No one helped him. No one moved toward him. He fled down a side street, his footsteps too loud, too fast. Thomas watched him go and wondered how long it would take before the bells rang again. He did not have to wait long. Before noon, they rang twice. This time, people counted. 2 deaths, 2 houses sealed, 2 names scratched into memory and then abandoned. By afternoon, the bells rang again. No one counted anymore. Thomas returned home only briefly. His room felt smaller each day, the walls closer, the air heavier. He washed his hands until his skin burned, though he could not remember when he had learned to do that. He wrapped the cracked skin in cloth and pulled his gloves back on. Outside, a cart passed slowly, pulled by a man whose face was hidden by a hood. The cart was empty. It would not remain so. As evening approached, Thomas walked again, though he no longer knew why. Duty had lost its shape. He found himself moving because stillness made his thoughts louder. In an alley near the tanner's quarter, he heard hammering. Sharp, desperate. A family was boarding their door from the inside. Thomas could hear the rhythm. 2 men working quickly, wood against wood. A child cried. The sound was muffled, cut short. The hammering stopped. Silence pressed in. Thomas stood there longer than he should have. He imagined the room behind the door. The fear, the hope that sealing themselves away might freeze time. It never did. Farther down the street, another sound reached him. Crying. A woman's voice, breaking, pleading. Another voice answered from behind a door, tight, shaking, unmoving. Please, the first voice said. I cannot stay outside. There was no response. Thomas did not wait to hear the end. He knew how it went. Doors had become choices. Opening them could kill everyone inside. Closing them could kill everyone outside. Love had learned to wear a blade. At dusk, the bells rang again. Then again. By nightfall, they rang so often that the sound blurred, losing its edges, becoming part of the city itself. Children fell asleep to it. The dying heard it in their final moments and understood what it meant. Thomas did not return to his room. He slept beneath the wall, wrapped in his cloak, the stone cold against his back. He felt safer there, between inside and out, belonging fully to neither. Above him, the city breathed, slow, uneven, failing. Somewhere in the dark, a door slammed shut. Somewhere else, a body was discovered. And somewhere deep within Blackmere, the bells waited, ready to speak again. No one planned for tomorrow, because tomorrow was already walking the streets. Morning did not arrive all at once. It seeped into Blackmere slowly, like water through rotting wood. Gray light touched the rooftops without warmth, revealing a city that had survived the night but not escaped it. Thomas woke to the sound of breathing that was not his own. For a moment, fear seized him. Then he realized it was the city itself, the distant coughs, the muffled sobs behind walls, the low murmur of prayers spoken to no one in particular. Blackmere was alive in the way a wounded animal is alive. Quiet, tense, waiting for the final blow. The bells had not rung yet. That worried him more than if they had. He rose stiffly and walked along the inner side of the wall. From here, the city looked smaller, compressed, as if the plague were slowly pressing it inward. Smoke drifted lazily from a few chimneys. Many stood cold and dark. A door opened below him. A man stepped out, wrapped in a cloak far too heavy for the season. He moved quickly, keeping his head down, and crossed the street without looking left or right. He vanished into an alley and did not return. By mid-morning, the bells rang. Once, the sound echoed longer than before, as if the city itself were reluctant to let it fade. Thomas descended the wall and followed the sound toward the eastern quarter. A small crowd had gathered, not close together, never close anymore, but within sight of one another. They stood like scattered stones, silent, waiting. A house stood at the center of their attention. Its door was open. That alone was enough to draw fear. Inside, a body lay near the hearth. A man, perhaps 50, his face turned toward the ceiling, eyes open and empty. No blood, no visible wound, just the stillness that everyone now recognized. His wife stood in the corner, wrapped in a blanket, rocking gently. She did not look at the body. She did not look at anyone. No one went inside. After a long moment, a clerk marked the door with chalk. The wife did not protest. She did not move. Thomas felt a strange certainty settle in his chest. This would not be the last open door. By afternoon, the city's fragile routines began to collapse. The baker's stall did not return. The well was abandoned after another coughing fit sent people scattering. A cart passed through the streets carrying bodies wrapped in cloth. The driver's face hidden, his movements quick and efficient. He did not stop. Children were pulled indoors. Latches slid into place. Boards were nailed across windows that had once been left open to catch the breeze. Blackmere was learning how to close its eyes. Thomas walked through streets that grew quieter with every hour. He passed a house where a father knelt in the dirt, whispering to his children. They were small, too small to understand the danger, old enough to sense it. He guided them down into a cellar, pressing his finger to his lips. When the door closed, Thomas heard the lock slide into place. He wondered how long they planned to stay there. He wondered if it would be enough. As evening approached, the bells rang twice. Then 3 times. People stopped coming outside altogether. The city pulled inward, folding around itself like a wounded thing trying to protect its heart. Smoke thinned. Fires went out. Even the sounds of prayer faded, replaced by a heavy, listening silence. Thomas reached a familiar street just as the sun dipped below the rooftops. A woman stood behind a closed door, her shadow visible through the thin gap beneath it. Outside, a man leaned against the wall, his strength failing. "Please," he whispered. His voice scraped raw against the wood. "Just for the night." The woman did not answer. Thomas saw her hand rest against the door, fingers splayed, trembling. He saw her lean close, her forehead touching the wood, as if she could pass comfort through it without opening the barrier between life and death. The man slid down the wall and stopped moving. The door did not open. Thomas turned away before the bells could confirm what he already knew. That night, they rang without pattern. Sometimes once, sometimes twice, sometimes not at all. The sound drifted through the dark, through sealed houses and empty streets, through dreams that offered no escape. Lying beneath the wall, Thomas understood that the city had crossed a line it could not return from. Fear had replaced hope, and fear, once learned, was impossible to forget. By the time the 3rd week lost its name, Blackmere no longer pretended to be a city. It had become a collection of closed spaces, rooms, cellars, corners, places where people pressed themselves against walls and waited for sounds to pass. The streets between those spaces were no longer paths of movement. They were borders. Crossing them felt like betrayal. Thomas felt it every time he stepped outside. The air itself seemed suspicious now. He breathed shallowly, as if taking too much at once might draw attention. He kept his cloak pulled high, though it did nothing to protect him from what mattered. The bells rang at dawn. 3 times. No one came out to count. By now, everyone understood the pattern. Bells meant death, but silence meant something worse, that there were fewer hands left to pull the rope. Thomas walked past houses that no longer showed signs of life. Some had been sealed carefully, boards placed with patience and care. Others were closed in haste, crooked planks hammered at odd angles, as if fear itself had guided the nails. On one door, a message had been scratched into the wood. "Do not knock." Thomas obeyed. He obeyed every door now. Near the river, he found a father standing watch outside a cellar entrance. The man held a knife, not raised, not threatening, but ready. His eyes were sunken, his beard untrimmed, his hands shaking with exhaustion. "My children are inside," the man said, without greeting. Thomas nodded. "I will not open it again," the father continued. "Not for anyone." Thomas believed him. He had seen what hesitation cost. The river carried refuse now. Cloth, broken tools, things no one dared to keep. Water was feared almost as much as touch. People whispered that the sickness clung to it, waited in it. People whispered many things. Truth had become flexible. As the day wore on, Thomas felt the city shrinking further. Not in size, but in spirit. Every closed door pulled the walls a little closer. Every unanswered plea made the streets longer, emptier. He heard crying from behind shutters. Soft, controlled sobs meant to go unnoticed. Louder ones, too. Those belonged to people who no longer cared who heard them. In the afternoon, the bells rang again. Only once. That single toll echoed longer than all the others. It suggested not mercy, but exhaustion. Thomas followed the sound to the square and found no one there. The bell rope hung still. The sound had come from habit, not action. Someone had pulled it earlier and left it swaying, ringing into emptiness. The realization chilled him more than the wind. By evening, the city felt hollow. He passed a house where the door stood closed but unbarred. From inside came nothing, not a sound, not a breath. He did not knock. He did not look through the window. He was learning. At dusk, he heard footsteps behind him and froze. Another man stood a few paces away, keeping distance. His face was pale, eyes too bright. "Do you know if the bells rang for the southern street?" the man asked. Thomas shook his head. The man nodded, as if that confirmed something he already feared. He stepped back, then farther, until the distance felt safe again. They parted without names. That night, Thomas dreamed of doors. Doors opening, doors closing, doors that refused to move no matter how hard he pushed. He woke to the sound of bells. Not loud, not urgent, just steady. Blackmere had turned inward completely. And those still alive were learning the hardest lesson of all. That survival often meant becoming unrecognizable to yourself. Part 4. The Point of No Return. There came a morning when Thomas realized he no longer knew the date. The bells had erased it. They rang before dawn, slow and deliberate, as if someone were counting the city down to its final breath. Thomas woke beneath the wall with the sound already inside his chest, vibrating through bone and memory. He did not stand right away. For the first time since the sickness had arrived, he wondered whether rising had any purpose left. When he finally moved, the city felt different. Not quieter, quieter had come long ago, but emptier, as if something essential had been removed while no one was looking. Streets lay open and abandoned, doors neither locked nor guarded anymore. The fear that once kept people inside had thinned, replaced by exhaustion. The plague no longer needed resistance. Thomas walked through the eastern quarter and saw a sight that stopped him cold. A body lay in the street, uncovered. No cloth, no chalk mark, no one had claimed it. The man's eyes were closed, his face peaceful in a way that felt almost obscene. Death had come gently to him, or gently enough to mock those who still waited. Thomas stood there longer than he should have, not out of respect, out of understanding. This was what the end looked like. The bells rang again, closer now. He followed the sound until he reached the square. The bell tower loomed overhead, its stone darkened by age and soot. The rope hung down, swaying slightly. A boy stood at its base, no older than 12. His hands were red and raw, wrapped in torn cloth. He stared at the rope as if it were a living thing, something that might strike him if he came too close. "Where is the man who rings it?" Thomas asked softly. The boy did not look up. "He died," the boy said. "Yesterday, or the day before." Thomas nodded. "Why are you here?" The boy hesitated. Then, very quietly, he said, "Someone has to do it." Thomas felt the weight of that sentence settle over him. Someone always had to do it. By midday, smoke no longer rose from most chimneys. Fires had gone cold, food spoiled behind sealed doors. The living had stopped preparing for anything beyond the present hour. Thomas found himself near the river again, staring at water that reflected nothing clearly. He remembered when it had been a place of voices and trade. Now it carried silence downstream. He saw the father again, the one with the knife. The man stood outside the cellar door, thinner than before, his eyes hollow. When Thomas approached, the man shook his head. "They stopped crying," he said. Thomas did not ask when. "They are alive," the father continued quickly, as if arguing with himself. "I think they are." The knife trembled in his hand. Thomas wanted to speak, to offer something, comfort, certainty, even a lie. He had nothing left to give. As night fell, the bells rang without pause. They rang until sound lost meaning, until it blurred into a constant presence, like the wind or the dark. Thomas stood in the square and listened, surrounded by empty streets and abandoned homes. He understood then that Blackmere was not dying. It was already dead. What remained was habit. The bells rang one last time before dawn, and then they stopped. When morning came, it arrived without sound. No bells, no voices, no footsteps echoing between the stones. Thomas opened his eyes and knew, before he stood, that something had ended. The city did not breathe anymore. He walked slowly, as if afraid that movement itself might disturb whatever fragile stillness remained. Blackmere lay open before him, unchanged in shape and utterly altered in spirit. Doors stood ajar, not from hope, but from neglect. Shutters hung loose, chalk marks blurred into the wood, washed pale by rain. Nothing waited behind them now. In the square, the bell tower rose into the gray sky. The rope hung still, untouched. Thomas looked up at it for a long time, expecting the sound to come on its own. It did not. He passed the baker's stall, the well, the empty market. A cart lay overturned near the street's edge, its contents long since claimed by no one. In one doorway, a pair of shoes stood neatly side by side, as if their owner had stepped inside and forgotten to return. At the river, the water moved on without pause. It carried no memory of the city. Thomas reached the house with the cellar door. It stood open now. Inside, the room was silent. The knife lay on the floor, where it had slipped from a tired hand. He did not look further. He did not need to. Some truths no longer required witnesses. As the day wore on, Thomas realized he was alone. Not alone in fear, not alone in waiting. Alone in fact. Blackmere had become a place without answers. No prayers remained to be spoken. No doors remained to be opened or refused. Love, fear, duty, each had burned itself out, leaving only absence behind. At dusk, the wind moved through the streets, lifting dust and loose paper. It slipped into houses and out again, unchallenged. It touched the bell rope, setting it swaying just slightly. The sound came then. One bell, low, distant, unanswered. Thomas stood in the middle of the empty square and listened. There was no one left to count. No one left to close the door afterward. Only the bell, ringing into silence, marking a death in a city where everyone had already known how the story would end. And when the sound faded, nothing replaced it, except the waiting.